The scanner at threscale 7 had a tendency to run about 4 seconds slow on compound identification when the sulfur particulate count climbed above 47 parts per million. I'd noted it in the maintenance log on day 2 of my rotation and adjusted my reading habits accordingly. You learn these things about a posting the way you learn any environment, by arriving at the same data from 2 directions and checking whether the readings agree. At threscale 7, the eastern panel and the western panel were slightly out of calibration with each other on humidity measurements. The primary atmospheric recycler ran 2 degrees warmer than its factory specification, and the geological moisture data for the southern approach was 14 months out of date on the compact survey maps. These were not problems, they were conditions. I logged them all and adjusted my methodology and continued to work. By day 6, I had the rhythm of the place in my bones, the way you get the rhythm of any long posting. The particular hiss of the atmospheric recycler at 300, cycling its temperature compensation. The way the eastern instrument panel's coolant line ticked 3 times in sequence before the pump engaged. The flat orange-gray quality of the light when the volcanic haze was at full saturation. 47 to 52 parts per million of sulfur particulate in the ambient atmosphere, which was normal for a monitoring outpost on the edge of an active volcanic field. The northeastern vent put out a steady low-pressure column most days, with cyclical variations that I was beginning to map against the geological record. On clear mornings, which were rare, I could see the top of the basalt ridge to the east through the shelter's single window. On most mornings I couldn't. Threscale 7 was not a difficult posting. It was remote, 4 hours by crawler from the nearest compact frontier station. No relay link except the encrypted network terminal that logged to the compact system at the top of each hour. No road in the standard sense. Only the basalt tracks that the previous rotation technicians had compacted into something a crawler could follow if you kept to the established line. It was sulfurous, and quiet in the specific way that frontier environmental stations are quiet, all data and no conversation. I was alone there. I was supposed to be alone there. My rotation was grade for solo monitoring, standard compact frontier protocol for low-priority atmospheric survey stations in the outer sectors. 12 years of postings like this one had made me good at the particular discipline of solitary technical work, the patience for data that accumulates slowly, the habit of keeping the log accurate even when the days feel identical, the ability to sit with a compound panel for 4 hours and notice the things worth noticing. I'm not someone who finds solitude difficult. I find it clarifying. In 12 years of frontier environmental work, I had learned more from outposts like threscale 7 than from any of the larger joint postings I'd rotated through, because the data is cleaner when there is no one else generating noise in your instruments or your thinking. On the morning of the 7th day, I heard a crawler. I was at the eastern panel running the 800 atmospheric sweep. The sweep is non-negotiable. The data window for the 800 reading closes at 8:02 if you want the cross-reference with the previous day's log to be clean, and I was running at 7:59 when the sound reached me through the shelter's insulated walls. A compact standard Mark IV transmission, I thought, in the low gear you need for the basalt approach from the southern ridge. The sound was distinctive enough that I had identified the transmission type before I'd consciously decided to analyze it. I finished the 800 sweep. I logged the data. Then I turned from the primary panel and went to the shelter's single window. A battered crawler, compact tissue, older model, the kind of vehicle you see on long frontier rotations because the newer models have calibration requirements that are harder to maintain in the field, had come to a stop on the flat basalt pad 20 meters from the shelter door. The engine idled for a moment, then cut. The driver's door opened. She got out alone. She was small, not short exactly, but contained in the way that some people are contained, as if their particular gravity occupies a precise and specific amount of space and no more. Deep gray skin, almost the color of the volcanic basalt when it's wet after rain, with something else in it that I couldn't name in the first light, a quality that wasn't quite iridescent but was close to it, the kind of optical effect you see in deep fractured mineral samples when the crystalline structure is very fine. Close-cropped hair, black with what appeared to be silver at the tips, a chromatic effect more like metallurgical pigmentation than biological coloring. She was wearing a compact outer sector field suit, standard dull olive with the hood pushed back despite the sulfur particulate reading on the external monitor, and she was carrying a compact environmental survey diagnostic case in her right hand and a sealed pack in her left. She was looking at the shelter with an expression I couldn't read at 40 meters through haze. I opened the door before she reached it. "Equipment failure," she said before I could ask. Her voice was even and flat in the particular way of someone accustomed to standard as a working language rather than a native one, carrying the precision of someone who chooses words for accuracy rather than warmth. "My atmospheric sampler, the humidity seal failed on the ridge access. I need bench time and access to a calibration standard." I looked at the diagnostic case. It was a compact environmental survey model, the same series as my own, and it was caked with enough mud and basalt grit to be consistent with a hard approach from the southern ridge. I looked at the sealed pack, which gave away nothing. I looked at her. "Davin Rail," I said. "Environmental Tech Grade 4, Water and Atmospheric Compound Monitoring, Rotation 3 of 6. "Keithai," she said. She did not offer a second name. "Compact survey, my documentation is current." I stepped back from the door and let her in. The standard protocol for incoming visitors at a frontier environmental monitoring outpost is verify documentation, run baseline compound panel, log arrival in the station maintenance record, provide access to the standard facilities. I did all four in order. Her documentation was current and clean. A compact outer sector survey certification with valid dates, and the standard Grade 2 field access classification. The baseline compound panel I ran through the station scanner during the 1100 sweep, as a matter of standard protocol. Threscale 7's atmospheric conditions require all personnel on station to log a compound baseline on arrival. It's the responsible procedure when the sulfur particulate count runs as high as it does here, because the human respiratory system can develop sensitivities to extended compound exposure that are clinically relevant and need to be tracked. I was not expecting what the scanner returned. The panel flagged 3 compounds in her baseline that I had not encountered in 12 years of environmental monitoring work. Not variations of known compounds, not novel combinations within recognizable chemical families, novel structures, entirely outside the reference database the scanner drew from. I looked at them for approximately 30 seconds. They were present in consistent concentrations across all 3 sample points. They were not contamination artifacts. They were biological markers. I noted them in my log as novel baseline compounds. Visitor panel day 7 requires follow-up analysis and return to the sweep data. I did not ask her about them. She stayed for the 12 hours she'd said she needed. I gave her bench space at the secondary workstation, connected the diagnostic case to the calibration standard, and went back to the primary panel. She worked quietly through the morning with the focused efficiency of someone who knows their equipment well, not the careful efficiency of someone learning a task, but the particular economy of motion that comes from having done a specific kind of work for a long time. I could hear the calibration sequence running on the secondary bench, and the sounds were the right sounds in the right order. At 1300, she went outside to take manual readings on the east perimeter. I ran her compounds again, not because protocol required it, but because I wanted to see if the 3 novel markers had changed since the morning panel. They hadn't, but I noticed something I had missed in the first reading, The three compounds existed in a precise stoichiometric ratio that suggested they weren't independent markers. They were components of a single synthesized structure, related to each other in the way that the parts of a complex compound are related, each one incomplete without the others, all three necessary to describe the whole. I logged this observation. I did not mention it to her when she came back in. When I returned from the 2000 instrument check, she was still at the bench, the calibration work done, and the diagnostic case reassembled on the work surface, sitting with her hands flat in front of her looking at the eastern panel's readout. "The humidity seal took longer than I expected," she said, without turning around. "The basalt on the southern ridge axis holds moisture differently than the compact survey map classification suggests," I said. "The geological moisture data for this sector is about 14 months out of date. I've been logging corrections since day 2. She turned then and looked at me with an expression I couldn't classify. It was not wariness exactly. It was more like the expression a person has when they have been watching something closely and have just received a data point that adjusts their model of what they were watching. "You noticed that," she said. "Day 2, I said. "It's in the maintenance log." A pause. The atmospheric recycler hissed at its low cycle. Outside the shelter, the particulate count was at 32, which was low for threscale 7, and the light through the window was the flat amber of early evening when the vent activity is reduced. "The eastern ridge axis is more stable than the southern approach," I said. "If you're going back out tomorrow, the secondary crawler tracks will give you a better line." She considered this for a moment. "I'll look at the geological log," she said. "I'll mark the relevant sections." I showed her the sections before we ate the evening rations in the shelter's common space, the 3 moisture mapping corrections I'd made to the standard approach data, the vent cycle correlation points I'd identified, the geological notes I'd added to bring the survey map current. She read them carefully. Not quickly, carefully, the way you read data when you intend to use it rather than just acknowledge it. She asked one question, about the measurement methodology I'd used for the moisture differential readings, and the question was technically precise enough that I answered it at full depth rather than giving a summary response. Then we ate the rations without speaking much, and she took the secondary bunk, and I went to the primary bunk and lay in the dark listening to the recycler and thinking about 3 novel biological markers in a visitor compound panel, and what a compound of those 3 structures, in those ratios, might be. She was still there the next morning. She didn't explain it. I didn't ask. She was at the secondary bench running atmospheric analysis when I came in for the 600 sweep, working with the same quiet efficiency as the previous day. And I ran the sweep and logged the data, and we worked in parallel through the morning, as if this was a standard dual analyst rotation, rather than an unplanned extension of a 12-hour equipment repair visit. At 1000 she asked me a question about the eastern vent's sulfur cycle, specifically about the 3-day output suppression I'd logged on days 4 through 6 of my rotation. The question was precise in the way that good technical questions are precise. It named the specific data point, it identified the relevant variable, and it asked about the relationship between the two in a way that suggested she already had a hypothesis and was testing it. I answered at full depth. She asked 2 follow-up questions, both accurate, both building on the previous answer rather than redirecting. I answered those 2. We continued working. That afternoon, while she was outside taking the 1600 manual readings, I ran her compound panel again and cross-referenced the 3 novel markers against every biological database in my station library. I found one partial match, a structural family reference in the Velsorn Frontier Geological Survey Archive, a supplementary database that had been added to the station library by a previous rotation technician and that I hadn't opened before today. The partial match was to a class of biological synthesis compounds associated with a specific Velsorn lineage classification mechanism, described in the archive's appendix in language that was technical enough to be accurate but condensed enough to require inference. I read the appendix twice. Then I started a preliminary bond compatibility model in the station's analysis software, using my own compound baseline as the primary subject profile and the visitor panel markers as the secondary input variables. I did not complete the model that day. I saved the partial run and closed the terminal before she came back in from the 1600 readings, and I noted nothing about it in the maintenance log. On the third day, she helped me run the 1400 cross-panel sweep without being asked. At threshold 7, the 1400 cross-panel sweep requires the eastern and western panels to be read within a 90-second window, because the vent activity creates a data consistency window that doesn't hold beyond 90 seconds. The physics of it are straightforward. The northeastern vent's pressure output creates a moving atmospheric differential between the eastern and western monitoring positions, and if the two readings are more than 90 seconds apart, the differential has shifted enough to make the cross-comparison meaningless. On a standard two-person monitoring rotation, this is a non-issue. On a grade 4 solo posting, it requires a modified sweep sequence that prioritizes the eastern panel, runs a compressed western panel read, and accepts slightly degraded data quality on the western side in exchange for completing both reads within the window. I'd logged the methodology modification on day 2 and had been operating on it since. The data quality was acceptable. It wasn't as clean as a standard two-person operation would produce. She appeared at the secondary panel at 13:58 with the sweep log already open on the secondary terminal, and without any discussion, she ran the western panel while I ran the eastern, and the data at 1400 was the cleanest I'd logged since my rotation began. "You knew the sweep timing," I said, while we were logging the results. "I read the station methodology log last night," she said. "Your modified sequence was documented." "The standard two-person sequence is more accurate," I said. "Yes," she said. I logged the sweep results. She logged the secondary panel results. Neither of us said anything further about it. I noted in the maintenance log that a second analyst was present on station for this sweep, and that the data quality reflected the standard two-person methodology, and I said nothing about the fact that she had read the station methodology log overnight and arrived at the secondary panel at exactly the right moment without prompting. People who work in frontier environmental monitoring for long enough develop certain habits around data. They read the methodology because the methodology matters, and they show up on time because timing matters, and they don't need to discuss it because the data either shows it or it doesn't. The data showed it. She stayed for the evening without discussing it. At 1600, she went outside to take manual readings at the southern perimeter marker, which was outside my standard sweep circuit, but which was, I had noted on day 3, relevant to the moisture correlation data I'd been building for the geological log corrections. She came back with readings I hadn't asked for and logged them to the secondary terminal without comment. They improved the moisture map by approximately 12% across the southern approach corridor. I noted this in the geological log and said so. The southern approach data in the compact survey map is wrong in 3 additional places, she said. The corrections are in the secondary log. I'll integrate them tomorrow, I said. The third correction will require a recalculation of the vent cycle correlation at days 4 through 6, she said. The baseline assumption for the southern perimeter affects the primary correlation. I looked at the third correction in the secondary log. She was right. The recalculation would take approximately 40 minutes if the data was clean, which it appeared to be. I'll run it tonight, I said. I can run the secondary cross-reference while you run the primary recalculation, she said. It will take 20 minutes instead of 40. We ran the recalculation after dinner. The vent cycle correlation at days 4 through 6 improved by a meaningful margin when the corrected southern perimeter baseline was applied. The result was consistent with what the Velsorn Geological Archive had suggested in the single reference I'd found in the supplementary database, which I noted without mentioning that I'd found a Velsorn Geological Archive reference in the station library. That night I went back to the bond compatibility model in the analysis software and completed the preliminary run. The model was based on partial data. The visitor compound panel markers were detailed enough, but the secondary input variables drew on the Velsorn Archive appendix rather than primary literature, which introduced uncertainty into the projection. Even with that uncertainty, the model returned a result that was unambiguous within its confidence interval: positive compatibility indicators across all 3 structural binding sites. The confidence interval itself was wide, because the data was partial, but the projection was not within the margin of error for a negative result. I looked at the result for a long time. Then I saved the model output to a locked file and went to sleep. On the 4th day, when the 1100 sweep was done and logged, and we were both at our respective panels with the morning data complete, she set the vial on the work surface between us. She placed it with the deliberateness of someone who has thought carefully about a gesture. Small, 40 milliliters at most, sealed in a field sample container made of a material I didn't recognize, pale and translucent under the instrument panel's amber light, closed with a pressure lock stopper rather than a standard field cap. The liquid inside was colorless, or nearly colorless. There was something in it that caught the light at a specific angle and produced a faint shimmer at the surface, the same quality I'd noticed in her skin on the first morning and hadn't been able to name precisely. "I need to tell you something," she said. I waited. She told me her name first, all of it. Velsorn Keithai Orvath, third-line heir of the Velsorn Orvath sovereignty, sole surviving member of the primary lineage after the Kethsorn faction conflict, had taken her 2 sisters in the past 8 months. She said it with the particular flatness of someone reciting a fact that has been recited many times, not without weight, but with the weight distributed evenly rather than concentrated in any one word. I listened without interruption. Then she told me about the compound. The Velsorn Orvath lineage carried a biological inheritance that their records traced back further than precise dating allowed. A compound produced by a specific chain of biological synthesis processes in the primary lineage body, synthesizable only by members of the direct lineage, and only under particular physiological conditions of stress or sustained alertness, that functioned as both marker and mechanism. As a marker, it identified the carrier's biological architecture in a way that no external scanner in the current compact reference database was equipped to fully classify. As a mechanism, when offered to another person and voluntarily accepted by them, it bound irreversibly to the recipient's neurobiological structure, integrating into the peripheral sensory architecture and producing changes that were permanent and real. The Velsorn tradition called this the Velkeith, the recognition offered. The doctrine governing it was absolute. The Velkeith had been offered 9 times in 400 years of recorded Velsorn history, all 9 times between members of the primary lineage. The compound had never been offered to a subject from outside the Velsorn species. The doctrine against it was not bureaucratic, it was foundational. She had synthesized this vial over the 6 days, since her crawler had appeared on the southern approach. She looked at me across the work surface with the vial between us, and she said the warning as it had been recorded in the Velsorn tradition, not theatrically, not as a formality, but with the precision of someone who intends the words to be understood exactly as spoken. The compound would bind irreversibly. The biological changes to the recipient's neural sensory architecture would be real, permanent, and significant. The recipient would not remain what they had been before accepting it. Then she stopped speaking. The volcanic vent to the northeast was at low activity, the particulate count at 31, the lowest reading since my rotation began. The eastern panel's coolant line was ticking toward the pump cycle. The primary compound scanner on the secondary panel was running a passive ambient sweep and updating every 40 seconds with the faint electronic sound that I had learned to hear as background over 11 days of monitoring. I looked at the vial. The compound scanner on day 7 flagged 3 novel markers in your baseline panel, I said. I noted them as requiring follow-up analysis. On day 9, I ran a stoichiometric cross-reference and identified the 3 markers as components of a single synthesized structure. On day 10, I found a partial structural reference in the Velsorn Geological Survey archive in the station library. The appendix references a class of biological synthesis compounds associated with a Velsorn lineage classification mechanism. I paused. On day 10, I ran a preliminary bond compatibility model using my own baseline panel as the primary subject profile, and your compound markers as the secondary input variables. She was very still. The model returned positive compatibility indicators across all 3 structural binding sites, I said. The confidence interval was wide because the secondary input data was from a supplementary archive rather than primary literature, but the result was not within the margin of error for a negative outcome. She said nothing. I've been looking at the result for 2 days, I said. The expression on her face was the one I had been watching since day 7 and hadn't been able to name. Looking at it now, with the vial between us on the work surface, I understood what it was. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying a specific weight alone, not a burden exactly, but a fact that has had no one else to share it, and has just discovered that the person across the work surface has been reading the same data for 2 days without saying anything. You ran a bond compatibility model, she said. It's what the data indicated, I said. And you didn't ask me. The data indicated what you were carrying, I said. Asking you before you were ready to tell me would have been imprecise, an inexact response to the available information. She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes in the amber instrument light showed the secondary feature I had been noting since day 8, a faint ring of a different color inside the outer dark iris, amber where the iris was dark, the kind of secondary feature that reads differently under different lighting conditions. Right now, in this light, it was distinct in a way it hadn't been before. You understood what the compound was, she said. I understood what the compounds were, I said. The Velkeith specifically, I didn't have that word. I had the structural data and the partial archive reference and the model output. What you just told me fills in the parts of the context that the archive reference didn't have. The doctrine against this is absolute, she said, in 400 years. You told me, I said. The transformation is real, she said. The biological changes to the neural sensory architecture. I read the model output, I said. I understood what positive compatibility indicators in that binding structure implied. I had 2 days to think about what they implied. She stopped. I looked at her across the work surface, clearly, with the same full attention I bring to the primary panel at the start of a sweep. Not looking for reassurance or permission, looking at what was there. The warning, she said. Yes, I said, I heard it. I reached across the work surface and picked up the vial. I opened the pressure lock stopper and drank the compound without hesitation. It tasted of almost nothing, a faint mineral quality first, the clean aftertaste of very pure water drawn from a deep fractured rock source, the kind of purity you get in geological filtration systems with a long residence time. And beneath that, something else that I couldn't classify with any reference I had and didn't need to. I set the empty vial on the work surface and closed the stopper out of habit, because UCAP field sample containers when they're empty, and then I looked at the primary panel. The first thing I noticed was that the eastern panel's coolant line sounded different. Not louder or quieter. Different in the way that the same data sounds different when you've increased the resolution setting on the receiving instrument. The same signal, resolved at a finer granularity. I heard the tick sequence with a clarity that included the slight variation in interval between the second and third ticks, a variation I had noted in the log as a minor mechanical characteristic, but had not been consciously tracking in real time. I opened the integration log on the station terminal and noted the time, 1003 hours, day 11. Novel sensory resolution in auditory register. Onset less than 4 minutes post-intake. She was watching me from across the work surface. "You're logging it," she said. "The data should be accurate," I said. "The integration record will be useful regardless of outcome." A pause. "Regardless of outcome," she said. "The preliminary model was based on partial data," I said. "The confidence interval was wide. I understood what positive indicators implied. I also understood that preliminary models based on supplementary archive references have known accuracy limitations." "The outcome is not in question," she said. Her voice was different from the flat field. Standard it had been for 4 days, not softer exactly, but changed in a direction I could identify but not precisely name. "I ran the model at the accuracy level the data supported," I said. The accuracy level of the data was not primary literature quality. "Davin," she said. "Yes." "The outcome is not in question," she said again, with a different weight in it. I looked at her. The amber ring inside her iris was more distinct than I'd ever seen it in 4 days of observation. Not brighter, clearer, as if the resolution on my observation of it had also increased. I looked at the integration log entry I just made. Then I made a second entry. Secondary sensory feature noted in observer's field. Ambient detail resolution increased across visual register. 4 minutes post-intake. Consistent with model projection for phase 1 onset. "The outcome is not in question," I said. The second hour brought more changes than the first, and I logged them all. The olfactory register shifted at 10:31. The sulfur particulate count the scanner was reporting at 31 felt, to my newly adjusted sensory architecture, closer to 28, which meant the shift was toward greater sensitivity rather than toward a different qualitative register. The ambient temperature in the shelter was more spatially specific than it had been at 1000. I was aware of the heat differential between the primary instrument panel and the eastern wall, with a granularity I had previously needed a thermal scanner to approximate. The seismic data coming through the outpost ground sensors, which I had been receiving for 11 days as a low background sensation in the soles of my feet, was now significantly more articulate. I could distinguish the base frequency of the northeastern vent from the secondary resonance of the geological fracture system to the southwest, 2 signals that the station's physical sensors logged as separate data streams, but that I had previously received as a single undifferentiated tremor. I logged each observation at the time it occurred, using the same flat notation I use for everything. Novel olfactory sensitivity shift, +3 parts per million below scanner baseline. Ambient thermal differential resolution increased, spatial granularity improved. Seismic frequency discrimination, dual source resolution, northeast vent primary and southwest fracture secondary, now distinguishable at sensor level without instrument separation. Times logged to the second. All observations noted against the scanner's passive ambient readings for cross-reference. She had moved from the secondary bench to the area near the primary panel, closer to me, with the gradual unhurried quality of someone who has decided to be closer to what they are watching and is not performing the decision. "How detailed is the log?" she said at 10:58, reading over my shoulder at the integration record. As detailed as the observations warrant, I said. The data will be accurate whether or not the outcome follows the model projection. If it doesn't follow the projection, the deviation log will be the relevant record. If it does, the confirmation log will be. Either way, the data should be complete. You're treating it like an atmospheric monitoring sweep, she said. The methodology doesn't change based on the subject matter, I said. The same precision that makes sweep data reliable makes integration data reliable, or it should. She was quiet for a moment. In 400 years, she said, the Velkeith has never been accepted by a non-Velsorn subject. I know, I said. You told me. The records confirm it. There is no record of the integration process from a recipient's perspective, she said. The Velsorn documentation covers the offering and the biological confirmation markers, not the experience of the integration as it occurs. There will be one now, I said. The log is complete. She looked at the integration record on the terminal. I continued logging. At 11:12, I noted that the air circulation in the shelter had acquired a directional quality that it hadn't had before. I could perceive the recycler's output as a distinct airflow pattern moving from the northwest intake to the southeast return, a circulation path I had known abstractly from the station mechanical schematic, but was now receiving as direct sensory information. Your species, I said, at approximately 11:15, while I was logging the 1100 sweep results alongside the integration data, uses the Velkeith as a bond mechanism. But based on the model output and what I'm observing in the integration data, the biological neural architectural component is the actual recognition marker. The offering is the invitation. The integration is the confirmation. Yes, she said. And in 400 years, the integration has only been confirmed between primary lineage members. That is what the records show, she said. Because the bond compatibility model has only returned positive indicators within the lineage. A pause. Her expression was doing something I didn't have a precise name for but was filing carefully in my working memory. That is what the records show, she said again. On day 8, I said, when you ran what appeared to be Eastern Vent compound analysis during the 800 sweep window, you ran a bond compatibility preliminary on my environmental tech baseline panel. She was very still. The compound analysis sequence you ran that morning was 12 minutes long, I said. The Eastern Vent compound analysis protocol at this station runs 8 minutes under standard conditions. The additional 4 minutes are consistent with the time required to run a secondary compatibility model overlay on a visitor baseline panel using the supplementary Velsorn archive parameters. Silence. That's why you stayed past the 12 hours, I said. Yes, she said. The preliminary model you ran on day 8 showed positive indicators. Substantially within the confidence interval, she said. The secondary input data, your baseline panel, was complete, primary quality. Not supplementary archive data. The confidence interval in my model was narrower than the one you ran on day 10. She paused. The outcome was not in question after day 8. I looked at the integration log. 43 novel markers logged in the past 2 hours, all consistent with the preliminary model's phase 1 and early phase 2 projection curves. The scanner on the secondary panel was running a passive update every 40 seconds and flagging each new marker with the same flat notation it uses for standard atmospheric compound changes. I looked at the pattern of the markers, their distribution across the biological compound profile, the rate of their appearance, the specific binding sites they were indexing, and then I looked at the preliminary model's projection curves. The alignment between the two was closer than any preliminary model I had run in 12 years of environmental work had achieved. You have been alone for 8 months, I said. She didn't answer immediately. The atmospheric recycler completed its low cycle. The particulate count on the external monitor was at 30, still falling. My sisters died in the Kethsorn conflict, she said. The faction that removed them has a documentation mechanism, a 3-day window from confirmed location of the last heir to file a succession override claim on the lineage record. If the Velkeith is accepted and confirmed by a recognized secondary party before the window closes, the biological integration record supersedes the documentation claim under Velsorn sovereign tradition. The biological record cannot be countered by a documentation filing. She paused. The faction confirmed my location 2 days ago. I looked at the date on the primary panel's log, day 11 of my rotation. The window closes, I said. Tomorrow at 1800 station time. I looked at the record terminal, the formal station terminal that logged to the compact network at the top of each hour, time-stamped and encrypted and authenticated by the network relay. Phase 3 of the integration, according to the preliminary model, and every projection curve the model had returned, completed at approximately 6 hours post-intake. Phase 3 completes at approximately 1600 today, I said. Based on your Phase 1 onset timeline, she said, and the Phase 2 progression I've been observing, yes. Phase 3 completion at approximately 1600 is consistent with the model. The record terminal logs to the compact network at the top of each hour, I said. At 1700 today the integration confirmation would be on the network, 13 hours before the documentation window closes. She looked at me with an expression I could finally name. I had been looking at it since day 7 and had been calling it unclassifiable because I hadn't yet had the reference data to identify it. I had the reference data now. It was the expression that data acquires when a model projection and the actual result align within the confidence interval, when you finish the sweep and the numbers are what the numbers were supposed to be. It was recognition. I went back to the sweep data and logged the 1100 results with the same methodical attention I bring to every data entry. All readings nominal, the vent activity at low baseline, the particulate count at 29 and falling. Phase 3 of the integration completed at 1554. I knew it the way you know when a calibration standard locks onto its target frequency, not with drama or sensation, but with a specific quality of resolution that is unmistakable once you have felt it. The environmental data the shelter contained arrived differently than it had at 1000 this morning. The difference was not quantitative in any simple sense, not more or less of any particular input. It was qualitative in the way that an increase in instrument resolution is qualitative. The same data, at a finer granularity, with more specific spatial and temporal information embedded in it. I was not what I had been when I'd opened the pressure lock stopper at 1003. The warning had been accurate. I logged the Phase 3 completion in the integration record at 1554. Integration Phase 3 complete, primary subject Davin Rail, day 11, threscale 7. All integration markers stable and consistent with model projection. Compound panel attached. No anomalies. Then I looked at her. She was standing near the primary panel with both hands still at her sides, and her expression was the recognition I'd identified at 1100, but clearer now, the amber ring in her eyes the most distinct I had seen it in 4 days of watching. Not brighter, clearer, as if the optical resolution of the feature had increased in proportion to the integration progression. The record terminal, I said. She moved to the formal record terminal. She stood at the input panel for a moment. Then she spoke first in Velsorn, in a register I could identify without understanding, the particular cadence of a formal statement made for the record. The same register I use for the atmospheric certification log at the end of a rotation, precise, structured, intended to be accurate and to remain accurate. Then she said it in standard. Velsorn Keith I Orvath, third line heir of the Velsorn Orvath sovereignty, Presents before the compact Frontier Outpost record the confirmed Velkeith integration of Davin Rail, Environmental Technician, Grade 4, Threshcale 7 Monitoring Station Rotation. Integration phases 1 through 3 complete. Compound panel verification attached. The Velkeith is accepted. The lineage is recognized. The terminal logged the entry at 1601. The shelter was quiet afterward in the way that a room is quiet after a significant data event. The instruments still running, the data still updating, the log entry time-stamped and on the network and not going anywhere. The atmospheric recycler hissed at its standard cycle. The eastern panel's coolant line ticked 3 times, and the pump engaged with its low thrum. Outside the shelter, through the single window, the volcanic haze was at 26 parts per million, the lowest reading in 11 days. The eastern ridge was visible, not clearly, not yet, but present in the amber light in a way it hadn't been since I'd arrived. Dark basalt, the specific texture of it coming through the thinning haze like a data point that had been there all along, and was only now reaching the resolution threshold. "The faction's window," I said. "Closes tomorrow at 1800, she said. "The biological integration record is now in the compact network. Under Compact Interspecies Biological Event Protocol, Article 14, Section 4, the confirmed integration record supersedes any documentation claim filed against the lineage record within the active time window. The Velkeith confirmation extinguishes the claim." "Article 14, I said. "Section 4. I reviewed the cross-species biological event registry provisions in the station legal database on day 10. She looked at me. "Day 10, she said. "I wanted to understand the procedural implications of the model output before I made a decision," I said. "The model output indicated positive compatibility. The procedural implications of a confirmed integration were relevant to the decision." A pause. "You prepared for this," she said. "I read the data," I said. "The data indicated what was present. The procedural context was part of the relevant information." "You read Article 14 on day 10, she said, "and you waited until I offered it." "It was your Velkeith to offer," I said. "The procedural context was for my own information. The offering was yours." She was quiet for a moment. The amber ring in her eyes was clear and steady in the instrument light. "You let me choose the moment," she said. "The data was yours to present," I said. "It wouldn't have been appropriate to present it before you were ready." We ate the evening rations without speaking much. Later, while I was completing the 2000 protocol log, she sat at the secondary bench with the Velsorn Geological Survey archive open on the bench display, reading something I hadn't looked at before. The shelter was quiet except for the instruments, and the recycler and the sound of someone engaged with data that they find accurate and useful. At 2200, I added to the maintenance log that a second analyst was on station for the remainder of the rotation, and that the atmospheric sweep data would benefit from 2-person methodology for the remaining 17 days. I noted her full name as the second analyst. All of it. I went to the primary bunk. The shelter's sounds were the same sounds they had always been: the recycler, the coolant line, the low-frequency seismic data coming through the geological sensors in the outpost floor. I received them the way I received them now, which was not the way I had received them at 800 this morning. And I noted in the integration log before I closed my eyes that the sensory architecture adjustment was ongoing and stable and consistent with the model projection for the post-Phase 3 stabilization period. The particulate count on the external monitor was at 22 when I checked it at 300 during the recycler's cycle. The next morning, day 12, 18 days remaining in the rotation, I ran the 600 sweep and logged all readings nominal, and she was at the secondary bench when I came in with the calibration check on her atmospheric sampler already complete, all indicators green. The humidity seal had held overnight. We ran the cross-panel sweep at 600 together, primary and secondary panels within the 90-second window, and the data was clean. The particulate count is at 17, I said, reading the external monitor. The 4-month station log low, she said. I read it on the external display. The wholesome secondary vent cycle model, I said, the one referenced in the Geological Archive appendix. You mentioned it exists. I have the complete literature in my survey archive, she said. The secondary bench terminal can access it through the survey case connection. The case connection is still live, I said. Yes. Then the complete literature is accessible, I said. The secondary vent cycle model would substantially improve the accuracy of the atmospheric sweep data for the remaining rotation period. Substantially, she said. The eastern array, I said. The 800 sweep first. The thermal gradient on the ridge stabilizes by late morning. The eastern array access is better after 1000. Noted, she said. We ran the 800 sweep and logged the data and suited up for the eastern array at 7:45. The geological log on her bench tablet showed the moisture mapping sections I'd marked, and she carried it out with her along the eastern approach path. I carried the manual sampling kit. The basalt was solid under our boots, and the air at 17 parts per million was the cleanest frontier air I had experienced in 12 years of outer sector postings. The kind of clarity that makes the data feel more honest, because the atmosphere is not obscuring the instrument readings. The 3-day vent suppression I logged on days 4 through 6, I said. At the first geological correlation point she identified on the ridge approach. You said the wholesome secondary vent cycle model classifies it as a pressure compensation event. Recurring every 14 months in this volcanic class, she said. The suppression is a predictable feature of the cycle, not an anomaly. The standard compact model doesn't account for it because the baseline data this sector uses is drawn from a different vent classification. With the correct model it would be predictable, I said. Precisely predictable, she said. The timing and duration both. We stood at the eastern array access point and ran the manual compound panel while the northeastern vent put out its low-pressure column against a sky that was larger than 11 days of sulfur haze had allowed it to appear. I logged the panel results, all readings nominal. My own biological compound profile in the scanner's passive readout showed the integration markers stable at the Phase 3 completion values, not rising, not declining, exactly where the preliminary model had projected them to be at this point in the stabilization curve. 17 days remaining, she said, looking at the vent column. The secondary vent cycle model literature covers the next 6 months of cycle projections for this sector, I said. The eastern array sweep data for the remainder of the rotation would be substantially more accurate with the correct model baseline. Yes, she said. The 1800 station time came, while we were logging the 1800 sweep results. I noted it in the maintenance log the way I note everything: the time, the readings, the vent activity, the integration marker stability status, and a final line that said what the data said. Faction documentation window closed, 1800 station time, day 12. Velkeith integration record standing in compact network, Article 14 Section 4 confirmed. All biological markers stable. Lineage record secure. Outside the shelter, the volcanic haze was at 15 parts per million. The record was complete and accurate as it should be. The data was what the data had always been. It only required the right instruments and the patience to read it correctly. 17 days of rotation remaining. The eastern ridge fully visible through the shelter window in the late amber light, the basalt specific and dark, and extending to a horizon that was further away than the haze had suggested it would be. At the secondary bench, the second analyst on station was reviewing the wholesome secondary vent cycle model projections for the next 3 months, making notes in the archive file with the particular precision of someone who takes data seriously and intends to use it accurately. I completed the 1800 protocol log and logged my final note for the day in the integration record. All markers stable, consistent with model projection, no anomalies, ongoing stabilization within expected parameters. Then I opened a new log entry for the atmospheric sweep record and began the 1900 preparation data, because the data doesn't wait for significant events, and the sweep window for 1900 opens in 12 minutes, and this is the work, and the work continues, and I have 17 days remaining in which to do it correctly. All readings nominal.